Democrats, if pressed sufficiently, can change. Republicans, by contrast, are hopeless. Those are the words of Professor Stephen Zunis, who supported you 10 years ago and is saying vote Democrat today.
Well, he's right on the civil rights area. The Democrats can be pressured by mass appeals on these civil rights issues. But on the corporate power issues, they're too far gone. We could never get today the legislation we got in the 60s and early 70s, even under the Nixon administration. EPA, OSHA, air and water pollution control, consumer protection laws, et cetera. You can't possibly get them. There's a simple auto safety bill to strengthen the budgets and law enforcement of the Department of Transportation following the Toyota acceleration problem. And it's wallowing in the House and in the Senate. There's a food safety bill that's 30 years overdue to deal with the contaminated food and preventing thousands of deaths and hundreds of thousands of sicknesses in this country. And it passed the House. It's been buried in the Senate. The Senate is controlled by Democrats. So, and they don't want to change the filibuster rules, and now that's going to come back to haunt them. So I think the Democrats are beyond, well, let's put some pressure on them. They've been so corporatized, so monetized, so driven on corporate power closer to the Republican Party, regardless of their rhetoric, that we have to have third-party and independent candidates, even ones that are up against all this rigged ballot access obstruction. No other Western country obstructs voters and candidates the way this country does, especially with its state laws. And that's why I favor people voting their conscience. As Eugene Debs once said, better to vote for who you believe and lose than vote for who you don't believe and win. And if we don't vote our conscience, if we have this tactical, pragmatic approach, I ask those people one question: what's your breaking point? How bad does the Democratic Party have to be, even though the Republican Party is worse, before you break away and stop being captured and taken for granted, the way African Americans have been taken for granted by the Obama administration? That's the key question everyone has to ask themselves as a voter. What is your breaking point? If you don't have a breaking point, you don't have a moral compass.
The question of corporations. You've written a piece called "When Corporations Are the Government," Ralph Nader.
Yes, the corporations now dominate every department and agency in the federal government, from the Department of Defense, Department of Treasury, Department of Agriculture, Interior, and other departments. By that I mean the outside influence on these departments is overwhelmingly corporate, even the Labor Department. Number two, they have something like 9,000 political action committees, auto dealers, insurance companies, banks, drug companies, funneling money into members of Congress and the White House. Number three, they put their executives in high government positions. Now, nobody comes close to that kind of triple control of our government. And when Franklin Delano Roosevelt sent a message to Congress in 1938 to set up the Temporary National Commission on Corporate Concentration, and they did pass that, he said in his message, when government is controlled by private economic power, that's fascism. That was in 1938. And now, more than ever, we have a corporate government in Washington, D.C., corporate-occupied territory. That is destructive of any semblance of democratic process, voice for the people, voice for labor, a voice for small taxpayers, consumers. They're shut out. They're excluded. And we've got to completely revise our sense of routine in our country. And we have to start right at the neighborhood and form little republics, so to speak, of 100 people each, friends, relatives, neighbors, and begin studying the ways that people are controlled in this country, how giant corporations have no allegiance to the United States other than to control it or ship its jobs and industries to repressive fascist and communist regimes overseas who know how to keep workers in their place. And if that occurs around the country, my guess is about 1 to 2 million people organized equivalently in the 435 congressional districts can begin turning Congress around And when Congress turns around, the federal government turns around. And when the federal government breaks its chains from the engines of corporate power, things can change, because there's a large consensus in this country on a lot of overdue changes, including full Medicare for all, including living wage, including cracking down on corporate crime, protecting the sovereignty of the people from being pulled down in these nefarious trade agreements, WTO, NAFTA. And above all, there's a big consensus on electoral reform, multi-party systems, cleaning up the monetization of holding elections as if they were auctions. That's what we got to do. Otherwise, we'll just keep diagnosing and diagnosing and
Nader,
exposing.
let me ask you something quickly.
And when nothing happens, people get frustrated and withdraw.
Ralph Nader, if the polls are correct and the Republicans take over the House, at least, John Boehner has already said that they will push to overturn the health care reform legislation. And there will be a number of subpoenas that go out, investigations like we saw with Whitewater under Clinton. What are your thoughts about this?
This is a dream come true for Mayor Mike Bloomberg of New York City. There's going to be gridlock, enormous acrimony. The temperament of John Boehner is conducive to that, and his cohorts. And the Senate is going to be more gridlocked than ever, not only because of its rules, because of its composition after today. And people are going to be angrier than ever, and it's going to open up an opportunity for someone like Mike Bloomberg, with his base among mayors all over the country and his independent wealth and his activity in New York City, to run as an independent candidate. I think we're going to have at least a three-way race, and I hope we'll have a 4-, 5-, or 6-way race with Green Party and Libertarian and Peace and Freedom Party and others whose agendas are very often right on in terms of majoritarian support. So that's what's going to happen. I think after today, Mayor Bloomberg is going to revise his calculus. He almost jumped in 2008. And he's going to say, this is the incredible year of opportunity for the mayor of New York.
And what do you think people should do today, Ralph Nader?
I think they should always vote their conscience, vote for people they believe in, like Howie Hawkins, who I've supported from Syracuse, running for governor of New York. And if Democrats vote for him, they don't have to worry. Cuomo is going to go in a landslide, so they can vote their conscience. But I believe that when people don't vote their conscience and they don't vote who they believe in, what are they voting for?
Finally, the power of organized labor, is there any? Where do you think labor stands today, and what are its prospects?
Well, one of the ways the corporate supremacists have increased their concentration of power in this country is by maintaining labor laws like Taft-Hartley Act that obstruct workers from engaging in collective bargaining. The ranks of labor in the corporate sector have been declining. I think they're down below 9% now. Labor unions are very weak. Rich Trumka is the new head of the AFL-CIO. He gives terrific speeches, but he's got to get more muscle and not simply be a toady to the Democrats in power today and later. So I think these are not good times for labor. The card check has been ignored by Obama, who promised to further it in 2008. The minimum wage is $2.75 lower than it was in 1968. Adjusted for inflation, it would be now $10 an hour at $7.25. You got 1/3 of the entire American workforce full-time working for Walmart wages. You can't support a family on that. And so I think there needs to be an adjunct labor movement that doesn't immediately say we want to form a labor union, but an informal grouping of association labor, the way Paul Tobias of Cincinnati has been pressing for many, many years, so it becomes a political base, even though they can't achieve a union in the workplace.
Ralph Nader, I want to thank you for being with us, longtime consumer advocate, corporate critic, former presidential candidate. His latest book, Only the Super Rich Can Save Us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. Again, we'll be covering the midterm election results tonight, 8 Eastern Standard Time until 2 in the morning with veteran independent broadcasters around the country.